G'day mates, it's Busta here, and I would like to give Best Fiends a shout out for sponsoring this episode. And you know, a crime is a lot like a puzzle. Each connection helps reveal the big picture, and it's a thrill to put it together. When I'm not thinking about true crime, my brain still craves a challenge, and that's why I love Best Fiends. Recently too, I actually introduced a friend of mine to the game, and it's been a lot of fun competing over who is in the lead while social distancing and whatnot. I've also really enjoyed some of the daily quests as of late, especially the wanted quests where you go out and try to locate certain bosses to get tons of rewards. And honestly, Best Fiends is just a great little game that features an array of puzzles with an engaging story, and is a really good piece of entertainment for casual gameplay. I'm still playing it on my phone at night when I can't sleep, and I've really enjoyed the fact that I don't have to invest huge amounts of time into the game to see progress and to have some fun. I've also really enjoyed the complexity in the levels as the challenge has ramped up, and one of the better aspects of the game, in my opinion, are the boss levels, where you have to really strategize for the win. One of the strategies that I've found really helpful, actually, is combining explosives to knock out huge amounts of hit points. Oh, and one other thing that I only recently discovered was that you don't actually need to worry about Wi-Fi access or using cell data to play, which is pretty sweet in my opinion. Best Fiends has thousands of levels already, with new levels, events, and characters added every month. It's hours of fun right at your fingertips, and like I said, you can even play offline. With over 100 million downloads and tons of 5-star reviews, Best Fiends is a must-play. Download Best Fiends free on the Apple App Store or Google Play. That's friends without the R. Best Fiends. This event took place quite a few years ago now, so unfortunately I don't really remember everything that happened, but I do remember nearly all of it. Anyway, this happened when I was around 4 or 5 years old and on an Easter Sunday. My family always gathers together at my grandmother's house to celebrate holidays, birthdays, etc. So as we do every holiday, my mother and I started our long-hour trip to her house. My mother prefers to live away from all the city commotion, which explains the long drive. But we were probably around maybe 20 minutes away from our destination when my mum noticed that we were a little low on gas, so we pulled into this sort of old, almost rustic-looking gas station with just a handful of customers inside. It was red and white with a few festive decorations outside, and lots of Easter stickers on the 2 large glass windows that were on either side of the door. My mum, having taught me not to talk to strangers, nor open the car doors for anyone but her, trusted me enough to leave me in the car alone as she went inside briefly to pay for the gas. She told me that she'd be right back before going into the gas station. It felt nice that day too, so the windows in the car were down so that we could feel the breeze while driving instead of the AC. While I was waiting on my mum, I remember adjusting the colourful paper clippings in my Easter basket next to me, then looking out of the backseat window. When I looked over, I saw a tall, older man, maybe around 30 or 40 years old if I have to guess, approaching my window. He crouched down slightly and looked at me. "Hi there, what's your name?" I remember him saying that. At this moment, I remembered that I wasn't supposed to talk to strangers, so I told the man that my mum says that I shouldn't speak to strangers. He then replied with, "Well, we can be friends then. My name's Charlie, and now that you know, I guess I'm not a stranger, huh?" At the time, I thought that he was right. In my mind, I thought, since a stranger is someone that you don't know, this man wasn't a stranger anymore because I knew his name. The man and I had a short conversation that I don't quite remember. All I do remember is that he told me that I had a nice Easter basket, I think. At this point, though, I started to get a really sick feeling in my stomach, but being a kid, of course, I just couldn't tell why. My mum then walked out of the gas station and noticed the man immediately and began approaching the car quickly, asking the man what he thinks that he was doing. The man then seems to panic and he pulls my door handle violently. He quickly realized that it was locked. Thankfully, it proceeded to reach into my window and grab me by one of my wrists and attempt to pull me out. This obviously scared me a lot, causing me to panic and pull against him on instinct. and this caused him to let go and take off running. My mum quickly ran to the car and I unlocked the doors. She grabbed me and pulled me into an almost painful bear hug, then inspected me closely, repeatedly asking if I was okay. I ended up with a bit of a slight bruise, a redness sort of on my arm where he grabbed me, but other than that, I was just pretty much shaken up. The reality of what had just happened, though, set in that moment, and I remember just crying and holding on to my mum right after I said that I was okay. And after that, I really don't remember that much. But I recently asked my mum about it, and she said that she called the police immediately after it. But to this day, my mum still says that this was the most frightening moment of her life, and claims that if she had gotten there just one moment later and came back to an empty car, that she just wouldn't have been able to have lived with herself. I was about 12 years old, living with my mum in a run-down apartment complex. The building that we lived in was the smallest of the three in the complex, and it was shaped like an L, with our apartment being closest to the inside corner on the shorter side of the L. To our right was another apartment, with another single mother and her son, who was much younger than me. Below us was a family with 2 kids that I was friends with, and the apartment above was empty. It wasn't the nicest area by any means, so after dark we always kept our windows and doors closed and locked. And the reason that I'm going into so much detail is so that you can understand why I believe that this voice didn't come from anywhere other than in our apartment. We were up late one night, around 11 p.m. I would say, looking at something on her computer. My mum and I would typically stay up late just hanging out together, so this was completely usual behavior. The computer was sort of tucked into one of the corners of our dining room, basically just a patch of lino off from the kitchen, and our living room was to our backs. We didn't have the TV on, nor did we have any other lights on, other than the one in the dining room. I can't remember what we were looking at too, but I do remember this sudden feeling that we were being watched. Many things that I attribute to sort of unexplained paranormal activity happened while we were living in this place, so while the feeling of being watched was incredibly uncomfortable, it wasn't something out of the ordinary by any means. But as I was beginning to shift my seat to turn around and look, we both heard a sinister male voice say meow. A conversation level, neither a whisper nor a yell, drawn out and sort of really exaggerated, almost sort of a tone, like it was mocking us. I would say that it took 2 or 3 seconds before this voice was finished, and in that time I felt every hair on my entire body stand on end. We immediately spun around, me nearly falling out of the chair to the floor, both of us now hyperventilating almost in absolute terror. My mum said something about it, "If you aren't good, then get out of here," or something to that effect. And I am honestly not sure how I slept that night, or any other nights that we were there for, but we never heard anything like that again. Which is probably the weirdest thing about this. It was just totally random, out of the blue, and never happened again. When I was about 16, I needed to get a job. I was out of high school and living with my parents who were driving me insane. I just needed to get out of there, and I was applying for jobs everywhere that I could see. I would even walk into a store and just immediately ask if they were hiring. I didn't care where I worked. I just needed the money to get out of my current living situation, stat. The local grocery store was having a mass hire, job fair type deal on a specific day and time, and I woke up early, got ready, and went. Everyone looking to get a job had to stand in a line and wait to be interviewed. No big deal, I just fumbled with my phone while I waited. The guy in front of me was sort of standing sideways so that he could easily face me and anyone behind me. He continually asked me questions like, "Is this your first job? How old are you? How far would you have to drive to get to work here?" And after that last one, I sort of sarcastically told him that I didn't know he was the person that was supposed to interview me. I thought that he got the point because he stopped talking to me after that. We get up further in the line, and finally he's being interviewed in this little office. It was really just a setup of tall pieces of cardboard that gave the illusion of privacy during your interview. It was set up right in front of the grocery store so that anyone walking outside could see you during your interview. I was getting nervous because I really wanted this job. When he got done and came out, he said, "Hope you get the job, cutie. I'd love to see you more." He said this as he sort of walked past me. If it weren't for the interview coming up, I probably would have told him to get lost, but anyway. So, I get into this makeshift cubicle office. The guy hands me some papers and tells me to fill them out. I do so and hand them back to him when I get done. But when I lifted my head up, I saw behind the man interviewing me was the creep from outside the grocery store watching me during my interview. I was reasonably anxious before, but now I was starting to worry about this creep. I try my best to make it through the interview without looking at him and answer the questions I'm being asked. But occasional glances towards him rewarded me with witnessing this creep groping the glass, having his hand down his pants, hopefully only acting like he was jerking off, and finally taking pictures of me with his phone. And at that moment, I was ready to call the cops as soon as I got out of there if he was still around. But when my interview was wrapping up, though, I was given some pamphlets and a gift card for a few bucks of groceries, shook hands with the interviewer, etc. When I looked back at the window, the guy was no longer there, and relief washed over me. I went to leave too, and was praying to God that I didn't mess up the interview. But I walked through the grocery store front, back to the door that I entered in, and shortly after walking outside, yep, I saw him again, leaning up against the wall. And yes, he saw me too. He was definitely waiting for me there, and I pulled my keys out and put them in between my knuckles like I was taught to do at a young age, and my other hand went straight into my pocket, holding my phone. I started walking towards my car when I passed him and he stepped to walk beside me. "So, how'd it go?" I said nothing. "You know, you're really too cute to be working at a grocery store. You could make a lot more money without even having to leave your house if you just went online." Disgusting, I know, but I still said nothing. "Oh, so you're going to be like that, huh? Not saying anything to me. Probably a good idea, in fact, because if you open that damn mouth, I'd be tempted to stick my..." I cut him off by swinging around towards him and punching him in the throat with my key fist. Unfortunately, my grip on the keys weren't tight enough and they fell out of my hand on impact, but it was enough to shut him up and get him choking. And at that, I grabbed my keys off the ground and I started running for my car. He was following me and shouting for me, calling me all sorts of names and other vulgarities that I don't remember, but I got to my car and locked it just in time as he slammed his hands down on my driver's side window. I was shaking like crazy, but I pulled out my phone and after a few feeble attempts from shaking my hands, I correctly dialed 911. He was pounding on my window with open hands, shouting about how I assaulted him, trying to open my doors, walking around the car to see if any of the other doors were unlocked. I tried my best to talk to the dispatcher and tell them where I was, and when he got back to my driver's side door and continued to pound on it and cuss at me, I held my phone up to the window so that he could see the number I dialed and who I was on the phone with. And on that note, his face went completely white, and he looked around and just sort of casually walked away. I waited a bit before telling the dispatcher that I think that he was gone. They didn't want to send out a patrol if he had left, but the dispatcher got the description of the guy from me and told me that they would have someone come out and look at the grocery store camera footage, that they would talk to the guy who interviewed me to see if they could find out who the guy was. I never did hear about the guy again, but thankfully, to my knowledge, as this grocery store I frequent, he didn't get the job. Unfortunately, neither did I, though. I live in New York. Recently I went upstate to the Catskill Mountains with my girlfriend, her younger brother, and her mum. They own land there, and my girlfriend's father built a cabin there too. I went there on July 9th and got back to the city on July 12th, spent 3 nights in the mountains. During the time that I was there, nothing unusual happened at all. Until the last night, that is. So we swam in a lake nearby. Funny enough, it's called Crystal Lake. But we also cooked a lot of food and overall just had a really nice time. One night I did vomit after swimming. However, other than that, nothing strange happened at all. But to give some backstory, the cabin is just great. It has bedrooms and all of that. A kitchen, even a ping pong table. However, it unfortunately doesn't have a shower or a bathroom, so you have to pee in the woods or poop in a bucket and shower with the outdoor shower that they have there. The outdoor shower is pretty much a shower head on a huge metal container. You can adjust the temperature with a dial. It has wooden walls surrounding it for privacy, but the side on the left is completely open to the forest. And basically, you just stand on a wet rock and wet yourself. This was my first time showering outdoors ever, and I actually really enjoyed it. At times I would just sort of stand under the water and look out into the forest. And every time that I showered, it was after 10 p.m, so it was pretty dark. The only light that I had was a lantern and my iPhone flashlight if I decided to use it. However, there was really no need for it since the lantern was pretty strong. But anyway, on the third night, knowing that it'd be my last time showering outside for a while, I decided to shower pretty late. My girlfriend was asleep and so was her brother and her mum. It was around 2:13 a.m. because I checked my phone before going to shower. I walked to the shower trying to open the door quietly so that I don't wake anyone up. And eventually I get there and I start doing my thing. But I realized about midway through the shower that I'd actually forgotten to bring my shampoo, so I decided that I would do what I always did, just stare out at the forest. It was really beautiful, even though it was dark, because the lantern lit up most of my surroundings. After about, I would say, 15 minutes of just staring out at the forest, I started to become uncomfortable though, and not because of the water temperature or anything like that, just physically uncomfortable. I guess you could say that I felt like how I feel when I shut my hallway light and then just sort of run upstairs in the pitch black. This hadn't happened to me at all the whole time that I was here though. All the showers that I took, I never once felt like this. I tried ignoring it, but it eventually just became too much. And as I went to turn off the shower, the feeling completely went away. I decided that I would stay in the shower after that, but when I looked back at the forest, I noticed a patch of moss on the tree closest to me. I had noticed it before, which was odd because the tree was closest to me. But even though it was the tree that was closest to me, I still can't see it properly though because I can't get the lantern wet. The lantern just stays at the entrance of the shower stall area, so the tree is still pretty much in the dark. But I focused more on the tree until my eyes sort of got irritated from the water constantly hitting them. I rubbed my eyes and just as I lowered my hands from my face, I saw a figure walking away from in front of the tree. The figure was dark, like a shadow, except it had the moss from the tree all over it. No facial features or anything. Maybe I just couldn't see anything because it was pitch black out there. But when this happened, I walked backwards and turned around to get my clothes and just run for it. And when I turned around, I slipped on a patch of grass and hit my back against the rock that I showered on. I felt lightheaded, but okay, so I got up, gathered my things, and sped walked back to the cabin. The next morning, as we were packing to leave, I hadn't told anybody about what I had seen or experienced that night. My back didn't have any bruises, and I had no scrapes or anything, so I honestly thought that it was just a dream. Until my girlfriend told me that I woke her up a bit when I got back in bed last night. I still didn't tell anybody what I saw though, but before we left, I told my girlfriend that I had left a sock near the shower area. I told her that I must have dropped it on the way back or something and that I needed to go and get it. I went back to the shower and I looked at the tree, but there was no moss at all there, just completely brown bark. Not even a speck of green, just some grey parts on the tree. I literally said out loud, "Wow," as I just sort of stared at it. And that's pretty much it. I went home and nothing crazy has ever happened since then. No weird experiences or encounters, just plain old normal life. So early April of last year, my roommate left me alone in the house for a week while he was off house sitting for his family. We're not in a great area too, but it's well populated, and our neighbours are fantastic, so I'm not too concerned, and am looking forward to having some peace and quiet for once. Just a bit after 7:30 PM, I'm upstairs, sitting in my jammies, fully immersed in playing a game, when I hear a knock at the door. Not expecting anyone, I looked out my window overlooking the porch and see a strange older couple standing there. Now, my grandmother's late husband seemed to think that providing my name and address to his church and repeatedly sending missionaries to my door to talk about Jesus was going to get me to join them on Sundays instead of sleeping in and being a lesbian. So, when I didn't recognize them from the neighborhood, I just assumed that they were some of the parishioners here to give me yet another Bible. Annoyed, I just pause my game and I head downstairs to do the usual. Thanks, but super duper happy smooching ladies. Bye. Song and dance, and open the door and notice that the guy is holding a clipboard. Odd, I thought. We do get the occasional energy efficiency or home alarm salespeople, but it was a bit late for that. I give them a sort of mildly irritated yes, and the guy introduces them as members from the International Family Federation for World Peace and Unification. That focuses on family, apparently. The name didn't really register, and he spoke in a sort of slow, even tone that was so distracting and unnatural it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. He immediately reminded me, for some reason, of Marshall Applewhite, and I thought how unfortunate that was for him. But he asks me if I think my family is important, wanting him to get to the point, donations, fundraising, whatever it might be, so they can get the heck off of my porch. I say, sure, I guess, or something to that nature. And then he tells me that they're conducting a survey and asks if I would be interested in sitting down for a few minutes with them. The clipboard was facing outward, and he took so long to speak that I was able to glance down and see that the first question was about marital status. My radar went up. First of all, there was no way in heck that I'm going to tell some random stranger at my door that I'm not married. I'm not about to let them in to view how alone I currently am in this evening. That aside, though, I was just getting super creepy vibes from them. The woman hadn't said a single word yet and was just staring at me the whole time. I told them that I'm really not interested, and I just shut the door. I still had that little nagging feeling, though, that something just wasn't right, so I watched them leave. And they didn't stop at any of the other houses, which didn't make sense to me if they were in fact doing a survey when we have a ton of neighbors and we're kind of in the middle of, well, everyone. But instead, they just got in their car and they left. I immediately whipped open Google to look up their organization before I forgot the name. The International Family Federation for World Peace and Unification. Quite a mouthful, right? But it was formerly known as the Unification Church, which is what I knew it as. And it's an internationally known cult that specializes in mass arranged weddings and crazy stuff like that. They had apparently rebranded and were apparently there recruiting at my house at 7:30 at night, the first day that I'm home by myself for a week. Something tells me that just isn't a coincidence. Needless to say, though, I spent the rest of the week with the curtains down, researching large dog breeds and anxiously waiting for my roommate to get home. We recently moved to Wisconsin to a newly built neighborhood. Our home is a duplex, but is in the same neighborhood as some sort of single-family homes too. There's an older house that our duplex backs up to that has very obviously been here since before the entire neighborhood was built. It seems that the city bought these people's land to build on. Their driveway backs up to our backyard, and these details are relevant later in the story. So, about a month after moving in, we woke up to take our dog outside, and our back glass door, along with the screen door in front of it, were halfway open. Now, we are very, very good about locking our doors, but nothing was missing. My MacBook, my iPad, my fiance's wallet, my expensive purse, and our TV were all in plain sight still, and nothing was gone. We just let it go, thinking that it was weird, but not enough to file a report or anything. Then, a couple of days ago, one afternoon, an elderly lady rang our doorbell, and I answered. She had a hospital bracelet on, but was otherwise well dressed, and nothing about her appearance alarmed me. But when I answered, she didn't introduce herself. She just started with, "So are you the owners or the renters, or..." and then proceeded to ask me about the layout of the house, where the bedrooms are, and if our outside lights were automatic. I didn't tell her the truth about the layout and told her the outside lights were automatic. She left in her car, which was parked down the street from our home. We asked our neighbours if she had come to them, but one of our neighbours said that she was outside and she saw her pull up and walk directly to our house. This is really strange too, because we're the very last house on our dead-end street, and she didn't go to anyone else. And then this morning, once again, we got up to take the dog out, and on the sliding door, there was blood dripping and splatter on the lock for the sliding door. I'm a nurse too, so I know blood when I see it, and this was the last straw. We contacted the police. They actually came out too and took swabs of blood and lots of pictures, and said that they would patrol more heavily at night for the next month or so. We are thinking that the only reasonable explanation for this, though, is that it's someone messing with us, and it would make sense if it were the neighbours behind us that I mentioned earlier in this story. I mean, maybe they're disgruntled that their land is being built on, and want to pick on us because we're right next door to them and are easily accessible. I just really don't have any other explanation for what's going on. The area that we live in is really nice, up-and-coming place, and it has a small population, and everyone who lives in this neighborhood are nice people with kids. A really tight-knit community too, and I don't know, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. About 3 years ago, I had recently moved into my dad's house. My parents are divorced. His house is 2 stories, and all the bedrooms are upstairs. My stepmom has 2 girls with him, who I'll call L and A. L was 2 at the time, and A was only a newborn. Since my brother and I didn't live there full time, until I moved in, that is, we gave up our bedrooms for the girls and moved into the playroom. Now, my dad's house just always gave me really weird vibes. I kept seeing shadows dancing across the walls and psyching myself out and whatnot, thinking that it was a ghost or a demon or something like that. We heard strange noises and lights flickered too, but most of it could be debunked as just house noises and such. Elle's monitor had a night vision mode, so we could see her when the lights were out, and the angle was just facing a crib. But one night I was up late, about 3 in the morning I think, watching Jimmy Fallon on YouTube or something, when I heard a bang and a scream come from Elle's room. She had nightmares quite often at that time, and my dad and stepmom were trying to teach her to console herself and just go back to sleep. So when I didn't hear anyone check on her, I just assumed that it was because of that. A few seconds later, maybe a minute I would say, I heard a blood-curdling scream come from her room again, and other sounds that I couldn't quite make out or understand. Thuds, knockings, bumps, crying and screaming is all I could hear. I heard heavy footsteps come up the stairs, and the door to the playroom started shaking. It didn't fit into the socket correctly, so walking upstairs made it rattle. But then I heard my dad's footsteps, which were very distinct. I quickly jumped out of bed at this and stood in front of the door to the playroom, listening as it just got really quiet. My dad yells, "What the heck is that?" and I hear more crying and a loud thud. My stepmom, carrying A, panicked, cries out, "How?" I'm just still standing there, mouth practically on the floor, shaking violently now with my hand on the doorknob. My dad comes to the door looking paler than paper, or more accurately, like he had seen a ghost. He asked me a question, too, that I don't think I'll ever forget. "Hey, did you see anything or feel anything weird?" I told him the truth. Well, now that you mention it, I do feel like I was being watched, and when I heard Elle scream, I felt like it was going to be bad. Like, not normal, if you know what I mean. He said yes to this, and I did too. I asked what happened, and this is what he told me. So he was sleeping on the couch downstairs after watching a movie. He woke up when Elle screamed, and as he sat up, he felt an intense pressure building around him, and he looks towards the baby monitor sitting on the coffee table. He sees what he described as an orb floating around Elle's crib. He then sees a black figure or a shadow person walk from the corner of the room to her bed, and the monitor then lost signal. He didn't even think, though. He had had multiple encounters with ghosts before, and none of the experiences were good. So he ran upstairs and he tried to open a door, but it was locked from the inside. When he got in, Elle was crying and screaming for help, but when my dad turned on the light, she just wasn't there. Apparently, he said, "Elle, where are you?" And she was under the crib. Now, that might not sound that crazy to most people, but her crib was not like most cribs with abundant space underneath. Hers was just really low to the ground, and the problem that he faced next was actually getting her out, because her head just simply didn't fit under there. No person would at all, actually, but he tried turning her head to the side, but it wouldn't even budge, and in the end, he actually had to physically lift her bed up and let her crawl out from it. She laid in his arms, screaming about being stuck like that, and after my dad told me this, my heart just sank. I had a bad feeling before anything happened, like the thing my dad saw on the monitor had been in this house before or something. I don't know how long, but I wondered if the shadows dancing on the walls were it instead of my brain messing with me. Anyway, Dad went back into Elle's room that night, and he slept beside her, and every time he let go of her hand, she said, "Daddy, don't let him get me again. I'm scared." And the next morning, she didn't talk, she hardly ate. Eventually, she seemed to forget about it, or so we thought. You see, about a year ago, my stepmom was reading Elle and a book about feelings and emotions. One of the pages was about fear, and she asks the girls, "Have you ever been scared?" A chimes up, "Yes, Mummy, when I can't find my kitty, my favorite stuffed animal." She turns to Elle and asks the same question, and Elle looks her dead in the face and says, "When that bad man in my room put me under my bed, I was really scared then, but Daddy came and stopped him." Needless to say, we were speechless. My house growing up was a two-family with a pretty big basement. We lived on the top floor, and the basement was used as storage and as a laundry room. The basement was pretty terrifying. It was always pretty dark. All the lights were in the center of the room, so you had to go into a completely pitch-black room, reach your hand up and pull on a string to turn the light on as well. I don't think I ever went into the basement without a weapon of some sort at least. When I was 10, though, my mum left me a note to move the clothes in the wash to the dryer. So I went into the basement, picked up a wiffle ball bat, and proceeded into total darkness. I've literally been preparing to turn that light on and see some kind of monster for years. I pull the string and take a step and look up to see a man. He was breathing heavily and looked disheveled. I completely froze. I'm literally shaking to a point that the wiffle bat is sliding out of my hand. Before I can do or say anything, I hear a gun being cocked, and my father from behind me say, "If you take one step forward, son, I'll blow your fucking head off." The man standing before me takes a few steps back, turns, and runs out the door that leads to the backyard. And long story short, I went downstairs. At the exact same time, my dad watched from the kitchen window as two guys were being chased by the police through the backyard on my street. He saw one of the men hop the fence into my backyard and check the door to the basement. He realized after a few seconds that I was in the basement. And these days, I still struggle to go into the basement. I'd like to think that I have a pretty decent instinct now when it comes to knowing who has bad intentions, but I wasn't always as cautious and as observant as I am now. When I was in high school, I always just felt so ugly. I had low self-esteem and anxiety, which was really more of a problem rather than my looks. And so, if anyone of the opposite sex gave me even a little bit of attention, I would start to like them. I was pretty innocent despite how desperate I was, I suppose, having only kissed one boy. So, when I was 17 and a college guy put interest into me, I immediately clung to him. I was on this app, before Tinder, and met a guy who lived about 7 hours from my home city. His name was Brandon, and he was gorgeous. Blonde hair, muscular, blue eyes. He played soccer for his university and was 19 years old. Honestly, he wasn't my usual type. I really like guys with darker hair and eyes. I still do, but he was really handsome and also really kind. He would shower me with compliments and talk to me all the time. I lived alone, long story, in an apartment with just my cats, so when I would get lonely or scared, he always comforted me. Now, a month into talking, he started asking for pictures. Not ones of my face, but obviously nudes or bra pictures. Now, this was nearly 6 years ago, and I didn't have a good concept of stranger danger on the internet. I mean, smartphones had only really been around for about 2 or 3 years at this point. At least in my school, and with my age group anyway. 17-year-old me, who was so insecure as well, wanted to make him happy because I couldn't believe that I'd gotten a guy like him. I was ready to do anything that he asked, basically, and I never sent naked pictures. I was just too insecure for that, but I would send pictures of me in my bra. He would always shower me with compliments saying how sexy and beautiful I was, and I fell for every word. With time, I started to get upset, though. I wanted to see him, and I would always send him pictures whenever he asked, but he would never send me any. He would show me body pictures of him with his shirt off, or things like that, but the pictures were always bad quality. When I started getting too persistent, he promised that he would start calling me. For some reason, this appeased me, and we'd talk many times a week. After a couple of months, he got increasingly more sexual with me, though, telling me what he wanted to do with me and how badly he wanted me. This made me nervous since I'd only ever kissed one boy, but it also made me a little excited. It felt good to be wanted by someone I had really grown to like. This was all during the first semester as well of my senior year of high school, and I was about to turn 18 the next semester in late January. As it got to Christmas time, he started to talk about coming to my city to see me for my birthday. This had me really excited since I wanted to see him in person so badly. We had first talked about me going to him, something that he insisted on, but I chickened out and I said that I couldn't do the drive alone. It was an excuse, though. I really didn't want to go to an older guy's house and stay with him alone. My own house made me feel more safe. Anyway, we planned on a weekend after my birthday, and honestly, everything seemed fine. But then one day in my choir class, my best friend, an exchange student from Germany, was talking with me about him. I was telling her about him and showing pictures, and she got very unsettled. "Hey, have you seen him on a video or anything?" I told her no, and she gave me a skeptical look. "Something doesn't feel right. There's no way that he's real. Not that you couldn't date someone like him, but he's just too perfect." She was very direct and blunt with me about it, something my other friends weren't. So I took her words deeply, and man, am I so thankful that I did. I immediately asked him for a picture of his face. He made up some excuse about how he couldn't take a picture right then, so I persisted, asking every single day. Finally, my instincts seemed to be kicking in, and I was getting scared. I told him that I wanted him to video call me, and he said no. I fought him on it for hours one night, telling him that if he tells me the truth, I won't get mad. But he refused. I put the name that he gave me into Facebook, determined to find him on my own if he wasn't going to give in. But nothing came up on him. I texted him telling him that I couldn't find his Facebook, and he gave in, giving me a completely different name, and told me that's me. I remember just feeling cold as I read that too, but I looked up the account, and everything that he had told me was a lie. His name, his face, his age. He was 25, not 19. And I was terrified. I thought that I'd been talking to someone just 2 years older than me, which is legal in my state, but he was 8 years older. And after this, I immediately stopped texting him. But that was when he started getting obsessive. He would text me dozens of times a day, call me over and over again. He would beg me to answer him, to give him a chance. Then he started threatening me to answer, and he told me that he had saved all of my pictures. He kept them all and told me that he would send them to my friends and my family on Facebook, show everyone me and my bra, and show our text messages talking about what he would do to me sexually if we met. Looking back, all of that was more damaging to him than me, but I was young and stupid, and I was afraid. I hated my body so much, and I was terrified of people seeing it. So I started talking to him again. More reserved and cautious this time, of course, but nevertheless, we started talking. The days inched closer to my birthday and the weekend that we had planned. Our messages had become bland and short since I was trying to make him lose interest in me, but he just never gave up. If I took too long to message, then he would threaten me again. My birthday fell on a Monday that year, and he sent me all kinds of messages. I don't even really remember what I did that birthday. I didn't have many friends, and I've never liked to celebrate anyway, so it was probably pretty small. But when Friday hit, I got a text from him that morning saying that he was driving to my city, and that he would pick me up from my school. I was honestly terrified. I had lost all of my friends a semester before. Again, another long story. So they obviously had no clue of my situation. Out of desperation, too, I went to one of my guy friends who I hadn't talked to in a couple of months and spilled everything to him. He was a long-time friend, so he was sympathetic and promised to follow me home that day. I went straight to my car, ignoring the mass amount of text saying, "Where are you?" and "I'm here." My friend drove behind me all the way to my apartment, which he had no clue that I was living in, and stayed with me as I just cried for a while. I turned my phone off after this, and my friend left after in the night. Brandon had no clue where I lived, but I was definitely still paranoid. I mean, what if he somehow found me? Only 3 people knew where I lived, 4 now with my guy friend, and he didn't come in contact with any of them. When I did finally turn my phone on, he was threatening me again. I was just so exhausted and fed up at this stage that I started spam texting him, yelling and venting. I told him how stressed he had made me and how what he was doing was wrong. I told him that he could send the pictures and that I just didn't care anymore. I started to attack his character, telling him how no one could love him if he hides who he is and then treats people like shit when they catch him in a lie like this. And thankfully for me, he had enough care for me to take my words to heart. He apologized and told me that he deleted all the pictures. He swore to leave me alone as long as we can still talk every once in a while as friends. I agreed, even though I knew I was lying. I talked to him for about a month, short responses until he just finally gave up. But even now at 22, I still see his name appear sometimes. I blocked his number and deleted him on everything, but his name still shows up sometimes on my Instagram or Snapchat when he's trying to re-add me. He's the reason I don't give my name or picture out, and he isn't the first stalker I experienced. The first one was actually in the 6th grade, but that's a story for another time. Anyway, let this be a lesson to anyone out there who's listening. Please be careful with who you share your information with, because just like me, it can come right back around to bite you in the ass. This is fairly long because it took place over about a year. I'm also a bit of a flowery writer, unfortunately, so please bear with me. So I'm a nanny, and I'd been with my current family for about 2 years when the oldest started preschool a couple of days a week. I'd drop him off around 9 and pick him up at 12:30, bringing his baby brother along. Now, this school was very hoity-toity, and most of the families who sent their children there were very wealthy. Everyone entering the building had to wear badges with their names printed out. Every entrance had a security guard and metal detector. They employed about 10 security guards around the building that patrolled the place from open till close. I became very familiar with several of them because I'd passed them at their posts on the way in and out. Most were cops just making a few extra $100 on their days off and whatnot, so they were fairly nice. And well, during the fall of 2017, the older boy moved to a new class on the other side of the school. This entrance was never as populated, so it was just a couple of people going in and out of the door during the day. The security guard was from a private company. He was always extremely polite and friendly. Definitely one of the nicest security guards, without a doubt. He was probably in his late 20s, I'd say. I thought that he looked like a young Santa Claus, if I'm being honest. Round, jolly face with a permanently red nose and cheeks framed by a thick brown beard, thin framed glasses and curly brown hair that went to about his shoulders. I eventually learned that his name was Nick as well, which only solidified my comparison. Months passed though, and we'd seen each other 2 or 3 days a week. The boys loved to wave to him, and he'd always ask how our day was, and we'd respond. In January of 2018, I actually came down with the flu, and I missed about 2 weeks of work. When I returned, I continued our regular schedule of school drop-offs and pick-ups. I was walking past Nick too, and I waved, and he stopped me and said that he noticed that I was gone for 2 weeks, and he hoped that I was feeling better. I smiled, thanked him, and said that it was the sickest I'd been, but I was glad to be back. I found it a bit odd, though, that he had noticed and that he knew that I was sick. I assumed that my employers had told him when they did drop-offs or pick-ups while I was gone or something, so I didn't think too much of it, and I just continued on, but when I went to leave, he stopped me again and told me that he didn't know that I wasn't the boy's mother. I laughed at that and basically said people confuse me for their mum because I'm with them all the time and we kind of look a little bit similar. He laughed too and then said, I was wondering, I never saw you with your husband and you don't have a ring on your finger, so I thought that you were just a single mum. I laughed nervously to this and didn't know what to say back, so I said, nope, just the nanny. I wanted to kick myself when I got back in the car. I was caught off guard, and I'm generally a bit awkward, so tend to not respond the best when put on the spot like that. I guess I just didn't realize that he'd paid that much attention to me. I'll admit that I was a little bit uneasy, but I found it harmless for the most part. The next drop-off day, I said hello, and he responded by calling me by my name, which he had never done before, and telling me that I looked nice, which he had definitely never done before, and I was pretty surprised. I started to think that he may be interested in me since learning that I'm not actually a single mum. This was weird for me because I'm actually gay and I look very gay, so men very seldom take an interest in me, so when they do, I'm actually pretty weirded out. But when I left, we exchanged a simple goodbye and the rest of the week was pretty non-eventful if I'm being honest. In early February, I was doing the drop-off yet again when, on the way out with a baby strapped to my chest, Nick stopped me. He was very courteous, but he asked me if I'd be interested in going to dinner with him some weekend. And again, I'm incredibly awkward, so my response was to laugh, and I could see that he was immediately offended. I apologized immediately and tried to explain to him that I was actually engaged and had been in a long-term relationship. This was true as well. And his face changed, and he said, well, where's your ring? The way that he said this, too, just made me feel uncomfortable. I felt accused and defensive. I told him that I don't really like wearing jewelry to work, so I only wear it on the weekends. I had accidentally scratched the baby with the ring when he was just a newborn, and basically, I just decided that it wasn't something that I'd wear when caring for them. He didn't seem satisfied with my answer, but let me go and told me to have a good evening. When I came to pick the older boy up that afternoon, Nick just seemed agitated. I said hello, and there was no answer. Okay. I was upset at that, but I let it go. I didn't want to hurt this guy's feelings, but really? Could he not tell that I was gay? The constant button-ups didn't clue him in? Did I need an undercut or something? It wasn't personal, but why was he so angry? When I left, he again ignored me. I just kind of swallowed my pride and thought, oh well, he'll get over it eventually. I'd put the baby in the seat in the back of my car too, and was buckling up the 3-year-old when a voice behind me boomed, "You don't have to lie to me." I whipped around, and Nick was about a foot away from me. I was grabbed between the car, the open door, and his body. He no longer looked like his jolly polite young man self, and he was big, probably about 6'2" and easily 400 pounds. Quite honestly, I was scared, and I was also angry. I mean, how dare he come up to me and scare me like this? How dare he corner me and intimidate me when he knows that I'm just doing my job? I hurried out of the situation, though, and I shut the door and locked it with the keys in my hand. I tried to back up, but he said, "You didn't need to lie to me. If you aren't interested in me, just tell me. I don't like liars." I didn't know this guy anything, but I explained that I wasn't lying. I said that I'm engaged and it's nothing personal. I said that he was a nice and friendly guy and that I didn't mean to hurt his feelings. He was angry, though, and he huffed and said, "Oh, you didn't hurt my feelings. I just don't appreciate the dishonesty. You lied about being their mother, so I figured that you were lying about this too." I was mad. I never once lied about being their mother. He assumed this because I was the one doing the drop-offs and the pickups. Our conversations just never got beyond hello, good day, and goodbye until recently. I decided, though, that this conversation was over. He was talking down to me and accusing me of just nonsense. I told him that I never lied about this or anything and didn't appreciate his tone. I went around and got back into the car, and he followed but kept his distance and said, "I'm not even sure why I wasted my time on you anyways." I was shocked. I mean, he was just a completely different person now. I avoid altercations at all costs, so for someone to speak to me like this was pretty upsetting, I'll admit. I ended up disclosing this situation to my employers, who got very upset as well. They did not like that he spoke to me like that, and especially didn't like this done around their children. They ended up contacting the school, which I was mortified about. I was terrified to see him again, knowing that he'd know that I had told him. That never happened, though, because he was fired and replaced with a retired cop who was incredibly unfriendly, and boy, was I grateful for that. But I did feel bad. I thought that my employers had overreacted, but they were prone to overreactions, and honestly, I was selfishly a little bit happy that I wouldn't have to see him again. I was worried about how awkward it was actually going to be. I let it go, though, and weeks passed and school drop-offs were pretty much uneventful again. However, in May of 2018, that all changed. So I live in an enclosed apartment complex in uptown Dallas. Our apartment and a neighbor's has a ton of bars, so we have issues with break-ins and vandalism from here to there. We've also always had a police presence, but after an incident where some drunk guy broke into the office through a window, the office manager decided to hire security guards. And I bet you can guess who ended up doing the night shifts, right? Yep, it was Nick. When I first saw him, I was checking my mail and he passed me in his uniform. I completely froze, and he looked me directly in the eye and said, "Good evening, man." Good. He must have forgotten me, right? I was shaking as I went up to my apartment and immediately told my fiancée who I saw. She was aware of the situation with Nick at the preschool, and being the daughter of a cop was always more suspicious and suspected the absolute worst out of pretty much everyone. She did not want him to find out which apartment was ours, so we started taking the back elevator and parking in different areas. He only patrolled the office area, the perimeter of the building, so we actually found it pretty easy to avoid him for at least a week or so. He only patrolled the office area, though, and the perimeter of the building, so we found it fairly easy to avoid him for at least a week or so. Now, one day, the back elevator was out of order, so I had to take the front elevator from the parking garage up to my apartment on the 4th floor. The elevator stopped in the lobby, and guess who walks on? It was Nick, and I completely froze. I guess that he could sense that I was anxious too, because he looked at me and said, "Don't worry, I'm not mad. You got me fired, but just don't do it again." I didn't even respond, and I got off on the 4th floor and then thought, oh crap, Now he knows which floor I lived on. I immediately ran inside and told my fiancée, and she said that she would contact the management. I convinced her that this was a very bad idea. It could make him angry, and I doubt that he would let it go again. I mean, he technically hasn't done anything, but did he follow me here? He knew me, but how did he end up here? It seemed like too much of a coincidence, I'll admit. I will say, though, that we did live in a bit of a panic. We kept our door bolted, and we even installed a camera. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of the story of Jennifer Morey. She was a young lawyer who was living alone in an apartment similar to mine in Houston. She was stalked and attacked by her apartment's security guard, and he actually had access to her apartment. She survived, but went through a horrible ordeal, and we were both terrified that this could happen to us. It got to the point where pretty much every noise unsettled us. We'd get up to make sure the door was bolted several times before we would go to bed. And that summer, we were convinced that he'd try to do something. And maybe it was just our overreactive, worried minds, but better safe than sorry. But we ended up avoiding him for the most part, and we saw him occasionally, but he didn't seem interested, and although we were always wary, we figured that he must have gotten over it, and we let our guards down. And he never did bother me again. He never said much of anything to me when I did see him, and I decided that maybe he was just having a really hard time last fall, and he was a really nice guy who maybe didn't have the best social skills or something. Now, fall 2018 rolls around, and I'm busy with work, and my fiancée is out of town, often on business meetings. And one weekend, I'm home alone, and it's 3:30 p.m, and I'm walking down to the office to get a package. And when I get there are about 3 squad cars and police just all over the lobby and going up the stairs. I'm wondering what happened, but like I said, we live in a pretty ratty place, so we have incidences with drunk assholes, so I figured someone had an altercation or something, got stolen or something like that. I try to eavesdrop, but I don't hear much. I go about my day and then receive an email from my apartment complex saying that they have a community-wide meeting scheduled to discuss the incident and go over resident safety concerns. At this point, I'm wondering what the hell happened. So of course, I go to the meeting and guess what it was? A young, single girl living in an apartment by herself showed up mid-afternoon to find Nick inside her apartment. She came in and her drawers were in just complete disarray. He was hiding in a closet and came up with some excuse. The security guards don't actually have keys to any apartments and aren't supposed to be in the residence halls. Later we found out that he had been stalking this girl and stole the keys from maintenance and made copies. This had also been going on for at least a month, if not longer. They also found several of her belongings in his vehicle, and he was obviously fired and charged. I didn't follow exactly what happened to him, but we assumed that he did some time. It was obviously a very scary situation, and of course our apartment complex got the pants sued out of them. I was glad that his attention shifted, but wonder what could have happened to this girl. But unfortunately, this wasn't the last time that I saw or heard of him. A few weeks ago, over a year since I last saw him, I went into this big fancy mall in my city, and guess who was working security? Nick. My first thought was, you've got to be kidding me. My second thought, though, was, how on earth does this guy keep getting security jobs? Who the hell is dropping the ball here? I saw him, and I just turned around and I walked straight out of that door. Thankfully, I'm actually moving out of state next month, but man, do I hope that I never see Nick again. So, I'll get straight to the point here. Every so often, I see this shadow girl. I feel connected to her, but she also just really terrifies me. She fills me with dread and horror, and it's not the kind of fear that makes your heart race and sweat form. It's the kind that makes you cry and feel cold inside. She most often appears when I'm feeling very sad or angry or afraid, and only when I'm alone as well. She's hazy and difficult to make out, but her presence is definitely palpable. She's rather dark, but not like dark-skinned, more like a living charcoal drawing or something like that. Sometimes the fear is worse than other times. Sometimes I can hardly move, and other times I even try to speak to her, and if she speaks back, I hear it as a voice inside my head. It's definitely feminine, but it's low and almost like a smooth growl or something. The first time that I saw her was in a dream when I was very young. I was running from a large monster, a sort of heavy brute animal. I was about to be caught when she appeared. In the dream, she had a colourful wreath around her head and she was floating. Immediately, I felt vastly more afraid than I had been of the beast as well. And the beast seemed to be afraid too, and cowered. I kind of knelt before her, and then I woke up and I was crying. Ever since then, she occasionally appears when I'm awake. Although she terrifies me, sometimes I think that she seems to favour me. For example, when I was in middle school, I got along poorly with this one particular girl. One day after I had an argument with her, I saw the shady girl in the bathroom. And the next day, the girl that I argued with came to school with a broken arm. In my freshman year of high school, there was this guy in my speech class who was a low-key bully. He did this thing where he acted like I was cool and he was my friend. Believe me, it was subtle. He was actually mocking me and it was super uncomfortable. He also did this thing where he would pound on my desk and make my face jiggle. I know it sounds stupid, but it made me really embarrassed. But anyway, one day after class, I was in the hallway alone and she appeared. She said something like she would take care of it. And the next day, the guy who mocked me was caught with weed. A few days ago, I was feeling really depressed when she appeared and said that she would try to make it better. A few minutes later, my mum came in and told me that she just decided that we should go out to eat at my favorite restaurant. I know that all of these things have a rational explanation, but it's always right after she appears. And sometimes, too, things just happen more directly. For example, I was in a mental hospital for a few weeks several months ago. One night, I was very angry and I was taking a shower. She appeared and I was afraid, but not embarrassed for some reason. She spoke to me, and for once, I actually started to feel calm in her presence. When I got out of the shower, I walked over to the cabinet in the room, and somehow I effortlessly just tore it off the wall, even though it was bolted down. Believe me, I'm super weak. I can't even really do a push-up, so there's no way that I could normally do that. The staff who were also there were really shocked that I was physically able to do that. Another time, after a fight with my dad, I saw her in a dark room, when suddenly I felt that same calm and I walked into the kitchen and I grabbed a large knife, and it didn't really feel like me doing it. It felt like I was just kind of drifting along and watching. I used the knife to threaten my dad, and when he started to plead with me, I felt like I had to break through something, and I dropped the knife, and it felt like something had been holding me up and just left me, and I almost fell. Anyway, you guys might think I'm mental, but the point is that whenever I see her, whatever she is, whether she's just in my head or something physical and real or spiritual, something always happens. And she really scares me. But I also feel tied to her, and I have no idea what she is, and I would really, really love some advice right now.